Welcome back to the Oregon Trail Read Aloud series. I'm very excited that you're joining me again today. Now our topic for today is a great adventure, and by the end of today's read aloud we're going to be able to answer 3 questions. The first question is, what is a pioneer? The second question, how did pioneers catch Oregon fever? And the third question, where and when did the great adventure begin? And to answer these questions, we're going to be reading sections from the book Don't Know Much About the Pioneers by Kenneth C. Davis and published by HarperCollins. We're going to be reading the parts from the book with permission from HarperCollins. So the first question we're going to be answering today is, what is a pioneer? And the first section of the book is going to help us answer that question. Don't Know Much About the Pioneers by Kenneth C. Davis. The first section in the book is titled, Who Were the Pioneers? This section is going to help us answer our very first question of today's topic. What is a pioneer? What is a pioneer? A pioneer is a trailblazer, someone who leads the way for others to follow. There are pioneers of invention like Thomas Edison. There are pioneers of ideas like Martin Luther King Jr. and Susan B. Anthony. But when we talk about the pioneers, we usually mean the thousands of men, women, and children who moved to the North American West between about 1840 and 1890 to build homes, farms, and eventually cities. They were families and single men and women. They were grandparents and newborns, blacks and whites, Mormons and Jews, Americans and newcomers from around the world. With their adventurous spirits and their sharpest axes, these pioneers built much of the United States of America we know today. Weren't there people already living in the West 150 years ago? There sure were. Hundreds of Indian tribes had been living there for thousands of years. Europeans also lived on Western lands claimed by Spain, Great Britain, and France. Yet even before the United States was born, people from the east coast of North America began pushing west. They took the frontier, or the boundary between settled lands and wilderness, with them. The first frontier stood at the Appalachian Mountains. After Daniel Boone led settlers through a gap in the mountains in 1775, pioneers spread to Tennessee, Kentucky, and Ohio, then farther west to the Mississippi River. When the United States bought the Louisiana Territory from France, pioneers began looking all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Many Americans came to believe it was the fate or manifest destiny of the United States to stretch from sea to shining sea. Did pioneers call themselves pioneers? No, they called themselves emigrants, meaning people who leave their own country for another. That's because many of the places the pioneers were going weren't part of the United States yet. When the first pioneers set out in the 1840s, the United States ended at the Missouri River. Beyond that was unorganized territory home to Indians, and beyond that, both Great Britain and the United States claimed the Oregon Territory, which included present-day Oregon, Idaho, Washington, Western Canada, and parts of Montana and Wyoming. California and the Southwest belonged to Mexico, and Texas was its very own country. The next part that I'm going to be reading from the book is going to help us answer the question, how did pioneers catch Oregon fever? What drew the pioneers to come to the West? How did pioneers catch Oregon fever? From letters, rumors, newspaper articles, anything that told of the Oregon Territory's beauty and riches. Oregon fever wasn't a disease, but an overpowering desire to pick up and move to the land that is now Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. In the late 1830s, letters drifted back east from a handful of missionaries who had gone to live among the Indians. Missionaries are people who want to convert or change the religious beliefs of others. These letters convinced people that the West wasn't just a wilderness, but a land of gentle climate, fresh streams, and rich farmland. It was only a matter of time before pioneers would go to sea for themselves. About 100 set out in 1841, 1,000 in 1843, and hundreds of thousands over the next 50 years. Pioneers went west because they, A, couldn't go east, there's an ocean in that direction. B, heard it was paradise. C, thought the East was getting too crowded. D, were looking for adventure and buried treasure, gold and silver. E, wanted free land. F, wanted freedom. Or G, all of the above. Why do you think pioneers went west? The answer is G. Pioneers went west for all these reasons. Some wanted to escape the dirt, disease, and crowds of eastern cities. Others were looking for adventure or a quick fortune mining gold and silver. Still, others simply wanted to live in a place where they could practice their religion freely, or, as in the case of slaves, where they themselves would be free. Probably the most common reason for going west was the promise of free land. Many people had lost their land and savings during money troubles in 1837, and they were looking for a place to start over. The West became a land of hope, a place where people could live as they wanted, a place where they could achieve the American dream. Finally, our last question that we're going to be able to answer by the end of today is, where and when did the Great Adventure begin? True or false? Pioneers rode the 2,000 miles to Oregon in covered wagons. False. Most pioneers who went west did travel with wagons, but the wagons carried supplies and were packed so tightly that they had no room for passengers. Families would make wagon space for those who were sick, hurt, very young, or very old, but the most common mode of transportation for everyone else was, you guessed it, feet. Even the person driving the wagon usually walked alongside the oxen or mules that pulled the load. How long did the journey take? Several months. Just think, today you can travel the same distance in a few days by car or in a few hours by airplane. 6 oxen walk only 1 to 2 miles an hour. Wagon trains usually traveled 10 to 15 miles a day, fewer when they ran into storms or rough ground. If your wagon train went 10 miles a day, how many days would you spend walking the 2,000 miles to Oregon? The answer is 200, or almost 7 months. Did pioneers follow the yellow brick road to Oregon? No. Most followed the Oregon Trail, which certainly wasn't made of brick. In some places, it was hardly a trail at all. The Oregon Trail was really many separate Indian footpaths along the Missouri, Platte, Snake, and Columbia rivers that mountain men had linked together. The earliest pioneers knew it as the Emigrant Road. Did pioneers use their best parachutes for jumping off? No, because they weren't jumping off an airplane. They were jumping off, as they called it, into Indian country. The main jump-off point was Independence, Missouri, at the western edge of the state. Can you guess which state's nickname is the gateway to the West? Pioneers gathered there and in other towns along the Missouri River to make repairs, buy last-minute supplies, and get advice. They also formed wagon trains or groups that went west together because that was safer than traveling alone. Most trains jumped off in April or May when there was grass for the animals to eat and time to complete the journey before winter snows fell. So the topic of today was a great adventure, and we covered 3 key points or answered 3 questions. What is a pioneer? How did pioneers catch Oregon fever? And where and when did the Great Adventure begin? And these 3 questions can be your main ideas in your 2-column notes. So after you are done viewing your video, you can get started on your 2-column notes. I'm going to write the title of the book, and on the left side will be your main ideas. So the main ideas are going to be your questions, and on the right column, you're going to answer those questions from our Read Aloud. Remember that you can always go back and pause the video at any point in time if you need extra time to write, or if you just need to review any of the points that we covered today.